Hey, I'm Mary Grothy, CEO of Sales BQ. Welcome to the Quota Crusher podcast. This is our special series where we're highlighting quota crushers. We want to talk to some of the best salespeople that we know so they can share their tips, tricks, and techniques with you and hopefully get you excited and feel a little bit more empowered to go crush it in your career. Recently, we put out a post on LinkedIn and said, hey, network, tag, comment, DM, who's the best of the best. And our friends over at CIENCE sent us their rep, Cody. Welcome to the show, Cody.
Thanks for having me, Mary. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and now this is your first podcast ever, right?
It is. So under the gun today, lots of pressure.
So much pressure. This probably feels a lot like making those first few sales calls of the day, right? Oh, so much pressure.
Yeah, definitely relatable, especially if you think back to the initial SDR days.
Whoo, yeah, those are super fun. I never had the luxury of starting out as an SDR. I went in as an account manager to start and then went into full-blown territory sales. And I've always been responsible for my own prospecting as part of the full sales cycle, but it was nice that I got to break it up. I didn't have the grind, that SDR grind of relentless prospecting all day, every day. I was really fortunate to be able to work full cycle. Actually, SDRs weren't really a thing when I started in sales, but I definitely know that's a new wave for sure. For our show today, I'm going to ask you a handful of questions. And this is a pretty standardized format that we're doing with all of our quota crushers because we want to make sure that the audience can start to learn to expect to hear what we have in order for you. So first, I want you to tell us about your sales career. I want to hear how you got started in it. I want to hear about the day-to-day. Tell me about this sales career that you have and what makes you great.
Yeah. So actually, well, I mean, I guess I would say that I got started in sales like in high school. I worked at a golf course growing up. That's definitely a hustle and a grind outside all the time and interacting with people. But I mean, my true first real career sales oriented job would have been the Golf Channel in 2015. So I worked at the Golf Channel out of Orlando. I was on their internal sales team. After about 9 months or so of working there and commuting from Tampa to Orlando, I got pretty burnt out on that commute and decided I would apply for a role as an SDR at CiteDesk was a former sales engagement platform similar to SalesLoft and Outreach. I had no idea what an SDR was. I went in, had an interview with Sean Burke, who now heads the sales team over at LivePerson. And we talked golf the whole time, sports, and just kind of about growing up in the sports space or in sports and our drive and ambition. And he hired me on to be an SDR. And I walked in, learned a lot about being an SDR really fast via Sean, who was the CEO there. And then Eric Quanstrom, who was my CMO at CiteDesk and my current CMO at CIENCE. And eventually moved from SDR to SDR manager, where I managed a team of SDRs. Super fun, learned so much, and still continue to coach SDRs and work in that relative space today.
Beautiful. Any notable rankings or stats or successes that you want to share from this sales career?
Yeah, I mean, not a lot of rankings per se, because I was one of the first SDRs at CiteDesk, sorry. So I went from being one of the first SDRs there to roughly within about 6 months being asked to build out a team. I built out a team of about 7 SDRs. I think one of the best things about what I did when I was managing that SDR team is now seeing the success that a lot of the SDRs I managed have had. A few of them, one manages or heads a global SDR operation at LivePerson. Another is an SDR manager at Outreach. A few are now selling in the space. Some are still notable and very recognizable SDRs. So I think that was cool just to watch everyone grow beyond CiteDesk and an SDR role and now see the success that they've had in their own careers in the SaaS or tech space.
That's got to feel so good. These reps are probably earlier in their career when you brought them in, right?
Yeah, almost every single one of them was straight out of college. Most of them came from the University of Tampa. We were local Tampa natives. That's where I live now. and everyone was former athletes, somewhat of it, or either baseball, soccer, basketball. So hired a lot of athletes, and it shows. I mean, I know we'll talk about this a little later on in the podcast, but I think that's one of the a great trait to have in someone who's moving into sales or an SDR in general.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's great that you had your ideal candidate profile nailed down. You know exactly who you wanted to bring in on that team. You were disciplined in the recruiting approach. And now look at it. Not only did you have a successful team of performers, they have now evolved in their own careers. They're leading teams with other big notable sales enablement firms and other companies. And that's pretty remarkable to say that you had a hand in that. Sales coaching and training and development is not easy. In fact, there's a huge gap in our world with sales management training. It's not easy to move into a management role without formal training, without guidance, without the mentorship. There's so much that comes up on a day-to-day basis that it can really throw you off on your game and you're not quite sure how to do it. What's difficult too is if you are a high performing rep, whether in an SDR role or a full cycle role, it doesn't mean that you make a great manager. There's actually a completely different skill set and set of traits that make a great manager. And not everybody has those. I mean, one of them is willingness to serve others. It can't be about you anymore. As a top performing rep, like I know when I was selling, when I was the number one rep, it was a transition for me because they asked me to start training and grooming up other reps across the country. They wanted to replicate my success, but I wasn't getting compensated for that. And I didn't have any quota relief for that. I loved doing it, but I had a full-time job and I had a huge quota and I wanted to compete. I wanted to be number one. And I noticed that for me as a young top performing rep, even though they wanted me to coach and train and I did do it, there was a big deficit, because I didn't really understand what it meant to coach, what it meant to develop people. There's so much patience that's involved. There's an acknowledgement that people learn and they execute differently than you. And so I think that that's incredible that not only did you step into that management role for the first time, you had a high performing team and clearly did something great, because now these reps have moved on into incredible careers. So congrats on that. So let's talk about the attributes of top sales performers. I wrote an article on this on LinkedIn. Oh gosh, Q3, I think, and indicated what I thought the top attributes were. I'd argue there's 4 or 5. I only wrote about 3. You tell me, what do you think the top attributes of a top sales performer are?
Yeah, I think that I could name, maybe 10, but,
Do it.
and I didn't see that post. So we'll see if we kind of cross paths here and what we think. But, I mean, I think initially it's got to be drive. You've got to be driven, and you've got to want to be successful in what you're doing, grow, and even grow beyond the career that you're just trying to ramp up to. So it's all about becoming, just taking your career to the next level and that's day in, day out. I mean, it's much like a sport. You're practicing every single day to get better in the long term, and not it just doesn't happen overnight. Self-discipline. I mean, nowadays a lot of roles are transitioning into remote, or you don't have that one-to-one access to a manager that you need, because managers might be, or a head of sales might be taking on many different roles. So you've got to be self-disciplined and be able to do your day-to-day without someone hovering over you, and basically making sure that you're executing on that. The other two that I would say are huge are empathy and humility. They semi go hand in hand. I mean, empathy, when you're selling, it's not all about you. It's about the prospect or the person you're trying to sell, and you need to be consultative in your approach. They don't want to hear all about science or all about whatever organization you're selling for. You need to understand why they came to you, what they're here for, how you can help. And then humility. I love a rep that can just absolutely crush and doesn't need to vocalize to the rest of the team or to anyone else as to what they're doing. And same thing on the field or on the ice or whatever sport you might be playing. If you can go out there and win all day long and keep it to yourself, I think that's one of the most impressive things that someone can do.
Yeah, you definitely would not have wanted me reporting to you, because even on the smallest wins, I made sure everybody knew. I was also very young and not very wise or professionally mature in my role. But yeah, I agree. One of my favorite sales traders, her name is Carol Mahoney, And she actually has a shirt and it's written upside down that says, "Not about me." And it's a hashtag, right? So it's like you look down and the shirt reads to you, "Not about me." And I love that because truly connecting with your buyer, that's it. Sales is, when you break it down, sales is not that difficult. There's a lot of steps, there's a lot of techniques, there's a lot of things that you do within the process. But if you understand that one principle, it's not about you, it's not about what you're selling, it's about them and why they're coming to you or agree to a conversation with you, and how can you solve their problems? How can you make their life better because you're in it? And if you truly understand that and can connect to it, sales will happen. But that is definitely a founding principle for successful salespeople. So your list aligns with mine pretty well. I called out definitely that drive is top of the list. The work ethic, the drive, the willingness to do whatever it takes ethically to succeed, the consistent, like I think of the way that I wrote it, a top performing sales rep doesn't have a plan B. Not succeeding isn't an option. They don't start their day and say, well, we'll see how this goes. They start the day, and in their mind and in their heart, in their inner being, they will win at all cost. Again, ethically, professionally. But there is no plan B. There is no option to not win. They go into the sales meeting, they've done their homework, they pre-call planned, they're well positioned, they know their talk tracks, they have everything ready for the discovery or their demo or their proposal. They begin with the end in mind. They've already seen what the end looks like. They've already visualized a closed sale and then coming on board. They assume the sale. They walk in and there is no plan B. There is no other option. There is no option to say, man, I think I'm just going to take it easy this morning and roll in the office around 9. Like top performing reps don't do that. Mediocre salespeople do. That drive, that willingness, that work ethic, that's what BQ is, by the way, if you're curious. In our name, BQ is the behavioral quotient. It doesn't matter how smart you are as a salesperson. It doesn't matter how well you know your product inside and out. Those things are very important. It doesn't matter from an emotional standpoint. You brought up empathy. That's great. If they can bring in empathy to the conversation, they can pivot well with their customers. They can read different personality styles, manage multiple people within one call. I think those skills are brilliant. They understand the key steps and stages of selling, but none of that matters. They don't actually do the work, because you
Yeah,
can be smart and you
I
can be
agree.
great, but if you don't make the calls, what does it matter? It's just like a company that has a great product. If their sales and marketing isn't good, it doesn't matter. Then you watch these companies with poor products, their sales and marketing is amazing, and they sell a whole bunch of crappy product because they're doing the work and they're having the conversations and they're getting engagement and they're getting in front of people. But it's all about the work ethic. So hands down, I think the top difference, the number one difference between the top performer and a bottom performer or even a middle of the road performer is the execution. What are they doing all day, every day? And I think it's minimum of preparing the day, whether that's the night before, in the morning. It's having backup plans in case meetings reschedule, cancel. It's having your prospect call list. Like if you're an outside salesperson, you should map the territory of where you're going. If you're going somewhere 30 minutes from your office, you should already know a couple of clients in the area, a couple other prospects you can drop into. Be purposeful with your time. I mean, what if that meeting schedules, cancels, ends early? What can you do with that other time in your day? Whereas other people be like, well, that meeting canceled, so I'm just gonna go to Starbucks and like grab a latte and, scroll my Instagram feed. Like, no, use your time wisely, be super smart about it. But I think that you hit the nail on the head with those attributes. So when we set up this podcast, I asked you, what are some topics that you'd be encouraged to talk about today? And one of those was discussing what fields do the high performing reps come from. I'd love to take a stab at answering that first, and then I want to hear your take on this. I grew up in a payroll and HR company. That was my professional upbringing. That's where I had all my crazy rankings and stats and great sales achievements. The infrastructure there and the culture of a high performing sales team was in place. There was a lot of discipline. It was very intense with the activity requirements. There wasn't, I would say, micromanagement, but there was active management. It was never acceptable to miss a target. There was a churn rate with the reps. Some people could not make it in that industry, but I've noticed with some of those big payroll companies, also there was a company out here called CBeyond, which is like an IT telephone company. And when I was at the payroll company, we used to pull people from CBeyond because when the top performing reps, they would say, if you can make it a year, if you can make it 2 years, if you can make it 3 years at such and such company, you can make it anywhere. And so some of these bigger companies, the Fortune 1000s, Fortune 100s, 500s, that have these rigorous training programs, and again, it's not micromanagement, but it's active management and high accountability to the metrics. I've found that if you can survive that and you've learned that discipline, that translates very well into other sales environments. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I guess I would ask you a question to kind of backtrack on that. Were CBION or any of those organizations that you see the success of these reps coming from, are any of those outside sales where you've got a territory or you're knocking doors, or it's not that you just pop in front of your computer every day?
Yeah, it's both. They have both inside and outside sales, but the majority of it was outside sales. So over time, those
Yeah.
companies have really built out pretty big inside sales departments. I had a really short stint, I don't tell people this, at a really, 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 really big IT company that recently got bought by a bigger IT company. Anyway, oh my gosh, they had a huge, I don't know how many square feet. I'm like really bad with distance measurements and whatever. I don't know. We'll call it 100,000 square foot building. It had 4 or 5 levels all the way up, and you started in the basement, straight out of college. They had a career fair. They pulled everybody. They promised them this huge career in sales. You had this rigorous 12-week program that was absolutely brutal through training, certifications, and cold calls. Then if you graduated that 12-week program, you got to go up to the next floor. And then the next floor was like a 6 or 12-month program. You had to hit certain metrics. You had to exude certain work ethic, and they were relentless. If you didn't make the cut, you were out super fast. And I think when companies actually enforce what they're saying, it creates more urgency with the other reps. Then if you pass that, you got to go up a floor. Then you were on that floor for 1 to 2 years. Then at that point, if you succeeded on that floor, you had an opportunity to take a territory anywhere in the country. And then you were an outside sales rep. Then you had to make it a couple of years in the entry-level outside sales rep territory. Then you could work your way up into channel, national accounts, named accounts, et cetera, enterprise, and work your way there. They had that thing so ironed out. I mean, it was a machine. But you know what? You could hire any rep from that company who made it more than a few years. They're going to be fantastic, disciplined, high work ethic, trained salespeople.
Yeah, they had to grind. And I mean, I think that's relative to anyone who does outside sales. When I was hiring for the SDR team, or even now when Michael, my head of sales, and myself interview people to come and sell at CIENCE, if they've done some form of outside sales, like there's nothing more impressive or nothing harder than cold calling than walking outside and knocking doors. If you're knocking doors face to face, the rejection you feel, and it feels like a personal rejection. So those guys, and then I think another industry too is logistics. That's a grind. That those people have been banging phones and just making hundreds of cold calls a day. So they're not afraid to work hard. Now, what kind of sales training they might have gotten in that time frame might be suspect, but at least they've done the grind and they're ready to move on to something better and well-deserved. And I mean, the lifestyle change that you take when you work outside or work cover a territory and you get to sit in front of your computer or work from home every day too, the prep that you can get done in the morning and the way you walk into work and how refreshed you feel is so different than executing on some of those roles that you've talked about.
Yeah, it's a big factor. And I would agree, like another attribute of an outside salesperson is time management and discipline and just how they set up their day. When I first started in outside sales, I'll never forget this conversation with my sales manager. I came in, I was like, I had a great day. And if you know anything about the state of Colorado, we have 4 major markets. We have Boulder, and then we have like Fort Collins, which is a northern Colorado. Then we have Denver, and then we have Colorado Springs. So those are our 4, and they're not close. I mean, it's an hour drive in between each one. And I was very proud to report my day. I actually went to all 4 of those cities in one day. So I had half the day in drive time and windshield time, even though I had 4 really great meetings. My manager looked at me and said, "You can't ever do this again. The amount of money that you just threw out the window by not strategically organizing where you were spending your time in the amount of time that you spent driving, you could have had 4 or 5 other sales meetings if you had just stayed concentrated in one part of town. So there's a lot of discipline that goes into daily structure and time management and being super smart and connected. There's also something that we teach at Sales BQ, which is called be the mayor of your territory. If you're in outside sales, everybody should know you. Everyone who's connected, networked, and even your prospective clients. You can build a brand on LinkedIn these days. You can be seen as a thought provoker in your community. You can do a lot of knowledge share on the platform. You can strategically grow your connections targeted with all the great filters LinkedIn has. You also place yourself at the key networking events in front of your prospects, but also with key strategic people that could be referral partners. You should have a label on your forehead. When I sold payroll, people didn't need to know the mechanics and specifics behind what I did. They just knew I was in the world of payroll, meaning every referral, anytime anyone ever said anything about payroll, I got the referral because I was the mayor of my territory and people knew. So I agree, there's so much discipline about being an outside sales role and proving success in the outside sales role, especially if there's the prospecting component, like you said, with door-to-door calling, et cetera. So that's really powerful.
Yep.
All right. So the last thing you said you wanted to bring up was how do reps break into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of friends that I have, or even those that are coming out of college that might reach out to me on LinkedIn or even reach out to anyone at any organization, they want to get into sales or they want to get into SaaS, but sometimes there's those barriers of like, you need to have X amount of years of selling, or you need to have X amount of experience as an SDR. So there's a lot of barriers to get over. And sometimes you get lucky, you meet the right person like I did with Sean. He hired me on, I got into this space I didn't even know existed. And, couldn't be more grateful for that, but how those opportunities don't come along for everyone. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, breaking into the industry. So the way I broke into the industry, and then I'll answer it more generalized. I took a sales admin position and I was $13 an hour. It was an administrative position. I actually supported the sales team of 8, reported directly to a mid-market sales manager. And I did that for 2 years. I learned the industry, I learned the company, I learned the product, I learned sales, I went out in the field, I shadowed, I took some sales training classes, I did a lot of things, but I was very young. I was 22, I didn't have a college degree, and I hadn't worked in a professional environment at that point, but I didn't know anything about sales. Or like you, like I got hired on through a staffing agency and it's like, cool, what's this thing called sales? I didn't even know, but I transitioned and I learned it. And then by the time I earned the sales role, boom, I became the #1 rep in 30 days, but I had 2 years leading me to that point to go crush it, kill it, and just be remarkable. If someone's looking at getting into a sales career, what you just said is spot on. They're looking at job descriptions. Very few sales roles are entry-level positions, unless you want to be an SDR or be in a very low-end, low-earning sales role, or I see people willing to take on entry-level, commission only, some of those non-glamorous roles like door-to-door with roofing companies, or you could even start out in more of a retail type position that has more of a high ticket process, like working at Home Depot in the flooring department. You sell some pretty decent flooring projects, and even working for a company that does blinds. You go into the person's home, it's more of a consultation, you have a longer sales process. I know that a lot of companies like financial advisor companies, Merrill Lynch or Northwestern Mutual, I mean, they have programs to recruit and bring in entry-level people. They have incredible training programs to work them through, but the consensus, what I feel is employers aren't willing to give you the pay until you earn your stripes and earn your keep and really have that experience and have it on your resume. But I know there are industries and people that will take those types of people in, but they are, in some instances, few and far between. Companies like the big payroll and HR companies out there, they will gladly take that entry level and they give them a much modified, smaller role and have them prove it out and more in a protected environment. But of course, the #1 entry level role that seems to be available right now in our job market is for SDRs. And it's not really a glamorous job. It's hard. It is the grind.
It is, but it's definitely, there's a lot of organizations that won't hire you in to sell at their organization if you haven't done the SDR role. And I think one of the things too, like even maybe this is because of where I went to college and it was in the Midwest, but there was no such thing as like talk about an SDR role. And I mean, that's only, you're talking 2000, I graduated in 2014. So that's not too long ago to where that SDR role existed back then. There was no exposure to it, and there was no exposure to SaaS or anything. I mean, when I was in college, I probably thought about Steve's dad sells at, you know, Google, and then someone else sells windows and doors like you're talking about. There was no in between for me. And I feel like it might even be portrayed that way nowadays as well. I'm not sure, but that's the way it felt.
Yeah, it's very true. I feel like people that want to break into this industry, they have to just roll up their sleeve and do their first sales year somewhere. And it may not be glamorous. Like, don't have high expectations out of the gate. Salespeople are really expensive to corporations. It's crazy. I'm sure the new reports will be released here for the new year, but I believe the industry average for salespeople was 54% or 53% achieve quota. So like half of salespeople don't succeed. And until that changes and turns around, if you look at corporations, if I'm an employer, which I am, I don't want to hire two very expensive salespeople and know 1 out of 2 aren't going to work out. That doubles the cost of my client acquisition cost right there. Unfortunately, because sales is so heavily performance-based, employers don't really have another option. You either figure it out and you sell, or you're going to get cut from that opportunity. So my advice for those young, hungry, or older and hungry people that want to break into this industry, you've got to put your head down and do whatever it takes to crush your numbers in your first year. If you can prove that out and do it and really confirm that sales is for you, I really feel like it opens up so much opportunity at that point, but you have to be willing to do your first sales year somewhere, and it just may not look very pretty. All right, that's our time for today. And so I am going to have you give us the free commercial. Tell us about CIENCE, what you do there, about the company, and how people can connect with you.
Yeah, so CIENCE is a sales development agency. We basically act as an extension of your sales organization. We go out, we prospect into your ideal client profile, try and drive new qualified opportunities. So that's our job, just doing the grunt work, the heavy lifting of the SDR for those organizations that might not want to hire an SDR team or hire an SDR manager, or have done that and it hasn't worked out, or they need to grow and expand fast and they don't have the time to go hire and spend 3 months training and do all that stuff. So that's what CIENCE does, rapidly growing organization. And I think to kind of take a step back to what we talked about earlier, the reason we've achieved what we have is because of our C-level. Like, when my CMO Eric came on board, it wasn't the best product, but he's just marketed it so well. And then my head of sales, Michael, defined this, a sales journey and a sales, like a guide that everyone works through here at CIENCE. So I think those things, as you alluded to earlier in the conversation, are so crucial to being a successful organization. And those are things that like someone like myself couldn't be more grateful for when you walk into somewhere like that.
Oh, that's so brilliant. And how do people connect with you?
LinkedIn, I think it's C Schmidt 91. I would have to double check on that, but yep, I'm on LinkedIn. Not too much for other social media sides, Instagram, but that's kind of more personal.
Sure. We'll find you on LinkedIn. That sounds great.
Cool.
And that concludes our podcast today on our Quota Crusher series, so that we can highlight some of the best salespeople that we know. Cody, thank you so much for joining us. And as a reminder to
Thank you, Mary.
Yes, you're welcome. As a reminder to our subscribers, make sure that you watch this both on YouTube. We've got the video in case you're watching this on audio. And then, of course, if you watch this on video, feel free to play this back on audio while you're driving if you'd like to do that. Connect with us, subscribe, and we'll talk to y'all soon.